The King's Trail, known as Kungsleden, stretches across the remote wilderness of northern Sweden, winding through alpine valleys and ancient birch forests. For decades, hikers have been drawn to its stark beauty and the promise of solitude. But beneath the surface, a darker narrative persists. Among the Sámi people, whose roots run deep in these lands, unsettling stories are whispered, tales of entities that watch, that learn, and that take. These legends warn that the mountains harbor more than just wildlife and weather, hinting at unseen forces that linger in the shadows. As we delve into this true account, the line between folklore and reality begins to blur, and the isolation of the trail becomes the stage for something far more disturbing. In the far north of Sweden, the King's Trail is shrouded in more than just mist and silence. Locals, especially those with the Sámi heritage, rarely warn hikers about the dangers of weather or wildlife. Instead, their cautions are whispered, almost reluctant, about things that watch from the shadows, things that learn, and things that take. These entities, they say, have existed in the mountains long before any human marked a trail or built a hut. The warnings are not shared openly with tourists, but linger in folklore, subtle reminders that the wilderness is home to forces beyond our understanding. What exactly are these things, and why do they seem to know us so intimately? The answers remain elusive, buried in the cold earth and ancient forests. The King's Trail, known as Kungsleden, stretches across the far north of Sweden, winding through alpine valleys and ancient birch forests. Established in the early 20th century, it was designed to connect isolated mountain huts and guide travelers through landscapes untouched by modern life. Even today, the route remains remote, with vast distances between shelters and a silence broken only by the wind and distant rivers. For those who walk it alone, the isolation becomes palpable, pressing in from all sides. In these empty places, the mind begins to wander, and the wilderness, indifferent, immense, can blur the line between reality and imagination, leaving hikers with the sense that they are never truly alone. Eric was an experienced hiker, accustomed to the solitude and challenges of Sweden's far north. In September 2024, he set out alone on the King's Trail, seeking clarity after a turbulent period in his life. The late summer crowds had faded, leaving the vast wilderness eerily quiet, and the birch forests were tinged with the first hints of autumn. Eric's account, translated and verified, would soon reveal a series of events that defied rational explanation. What began as a routine trek quickly became something far more disturbing, raising questions about what truly lurks in the untouched wilds of Scandinavia. For the first 3 days, Eric settled into the rhythm of the King's Trail. The landscape was vast and silent, offering him a rare sense of solitude and clarity. Each morning he packed his gear, followed the winding path, and let the cold air sharpen his thoughts. But on the 3rd day, something changed. Near a stream crossing, Eric noticed boot prints in the mud, prints that matched his own tread pattern, even the unique wear on the right side. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence, but the uncanny similarity lingered, quietly unsettling the comfort he had found in the wilderness. Was it simply paranoia, or had something else begun to follow him? Eric tried to dismiss the boot prints as coincidence, reasoning that many hikers wore the same brand of boots along the King's Trail. Yet, The uncanny resemblance, the tread pattern, the worn edge, gnawed at him as he pressed onward. The birch forests were turning yellow, and the air grew colder, amplifying the isolation of late September. Each step through the shifting landscape felt heavier, the silence of the wilderness deepening his sense of unease. Alone, Eric wondered if the trail was truly as mapped and tamed as he believed, or if something unseen watched from the shadows. The Salka hut sits isolated in the vast Swedish wilderness, its wooden walls sheltering only a handful of travelers. On this particular night, Eric shares the space with a German couple, their presence a brief comfort against the emptiness outside. As darkness settles, an unsettling quiet fills the hut, broken only by the faint aroma of pine smoke drifting through the air. There is no fireplace in Eric's room, no logical source for the scent, yet it lingers, subtle, persistent, and inexplicable. In these remote places, even the smallest anomaly can feel like a warning, a whisper from the wild that something unseen is watching. Morning light filtered through the birch trees, and for a brief moment, Eric felt the reassuring routine of the trail return. He packed his gear, brewed coffee, and began the steep ascent out of the valley, the crisp air sharpening his senses. But as he rounded a bend, a figure appeared ahead, walking toward him with unsettling familiarity. The stranger wore the same green jacket, carried the same backpack, even sported the same reflective patch Eric had sewn himself. When their eyes met, Eric saw his own face staring back, identical in every detail, yet disturbingly off. The eyes too wide, the skin too pale, the mouth oddly flat. Neither spoke. As they passed, the silence hung heavy, and Eric felt a cold certainty. Something on the King's trail was learning to mimic him. What was it, and how long had it been watching? On the third day, Eric's solitary hike took a chilling turn. As he navigated a narrow stretch of birch forest, he came face to face with a figure wearing identical gear, his green jacket, his black backpack, even the same reflective patch he'd sewn himself. But it was the face that froze him, his own, down to the scar above his eyebrow, yet warped by wide, unnatural eyes and skin drained of warmth. They passed each other in silence, the air thick with a sharp metallic scent, copper mingled with pine smoke. The encounter left Eric shaken, his mind struggling to rationalize the impossible. Was it exhaustion, or had something ancient and unknown learned to mimic him in the wilderness? The answer remained elusive, lingering in the cold air long after the figure vanished. Eric's rational mind fought to explain away the encounter. He blamed exhaustion, isolation, even the tricks of the mind that come with days spent alone in the wilderness. Yet, as he pressed on, the evidence refused to fade. Identical boot prints, his own tread pattern, appeared ahead of him, sometimes veering off the trail and disappearing into the dense birch forest. Each new print seemed to mock his attempts at logic, deepening the sense that something was following, learning, and perhaps even imitating him. The forest, once a place of solitude, now felt alive with a silent, watching presence. What began as anxiety was quickly becoming terror, and Eric realized he could no longer trust his senses or the land itself. As Eric continued along the King's trail, a new and unsettling pattern emerged. Footsteps began to echo his every movement, always behind him, always in perfect synchrony. Each time he stopped, the footsteps halted. When he resumed, so did the unseen follower, No matter how quickly he spun around or how long he waited, the trail remained empty. No sign of another hiker, no explanation for the relentless pursuit. The silence of the wilderness became oppressive, and Eric's growing sense of being hunted gnawed at his resolve, leaving him increasingly isolated and vulnerable. What was stalking him in the endless birch forests, and why did it know his every step? When Eric reached the ice cocoa hut, he found it deserted. No hikers, no voices, only the hollow echo of his own footsteps. The silence inside pressed against him, thick and unnatural, as if the building itself was holding its breath. He tried to busy himself with routine, preparing a meal and choosing a bunk, but every creak of the wood seemed to signal something lurking just beyond the walls. Shadows stretched long in the corners, and Eric could not shake the persistent sensation that unseen eyes were tracking his every move. In this isolated shelter, the emptiness felt alive, waiting for night to fall. As darkness settles over the isolated hut, the silence is broken by the sound of footsteps, slow, purposeful, echoing along the wooden porch. The air thickens with an unsettling blend of pine smoke and copper, seeping through the cracks and saturating the room. 3 deliberate knocks reverberate against Eric's door, each one measured, each one demanding attention. Shadows shift beneath the threshold, hinting at a presence just beyond, waiting. In that moment, the boundary between the familiar and the unknown feels paper-thin, raising the question, what truly waits outside in the cold northern night? That night, Eric found himself trapped in a relentless cycle of dread. Every creak of the hut seemed amplified, each shadow stretched longer by his imagination. Outside, footsteps paced the porch, slow, deliberate, accompanied by a choking scent of pine smoke and copper. When morning finally broke, Eric discovered the porch covered in muddy boot prints, each one matching his own tread, but smeared and dragged as if something was wrong with the foot that made them. The evidence was undeniable. Whatever haunted the hut had learned to mimic him, leaving behind a disturbing trail that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. What exactly was circling in the darkness, and why did it choose Eric? Despite the mounting fear and the relentless presence stalking him, Eric made a decision that would test his resolve. He chose to camp in the open, exposed beneath the cold northern sky, rather than risk another night confined within the walls of a hut. The forest around him was silent, its shadows deepening as dusk settled. Every sound became a warning, every movement a potential threat. Alone in the wilderness, Eric clung to the hope that daylight would bring safety, but the night was far from over, and the trail ahead held secrets he could not yet imagine. As dusk settles over the birch clearing, Eric methodically pitches his tent and prepares a simple meal, determined to cling to routine. Yet, the forest's silence feels unnatural. No wind, no birds, not even the distant rustle of leaves. The quiet presses in, heavy and absolute, amplifying every sound he makes. Alone beneath the pale canopy, Eric senses the wilderness watching, its stillness hinting at a presence just beyond perception. In this moment, normalcy becomes a fragile illusion, and the darkness seems to wait for something to break the silence. As darkness settles over the birch forest, Eric lies awake in his tent, every muscle tense. Outside, slow, deliberate footsteps begin to circle, their rhythm unnervingly steady. Then, From just beyond the thin nylon wall, a voice calls his name. It is unmistakably his own, yet warped, flat, stilted, and stripped of all familiar warmth. The words repeat, echoing his thoughts and plans, as if something unseen is learning to mimic him. The air grows thick with the scent of pine smoke and copper, and Eric realizes he's no longer alone. What waits outside is not simply a stranger, but something that knows him intimately and is trying to become him. As Eric lay frozen inside his tent, the entity outside began to mimic his voice, repeating his thoughts and phrases with a cadence that was disturbingly off. Each word was delivered in a flat, mechanical tone, as if the creature was learning to speak for the first time. The air grew thick with the scent of pine smoke and copper, so strong it seemed to seep through the fabric of the tent, coating Eric's tongue with a metallic taste. The voice continued, echoing his plans and desires, twisting them into something unnatural. In that suffocating silence, Eric realized the thing outside wasn't just watching, it was learning, and it knew far more about him than he could have imagined. Throughout the night, Eric lay paralyzed, his senses heightened by the relentless presence outside his tent. The voice, eerily mimicking his own, repeated his name in a cadence that felt unnatural, while the sound of heavy, wet breathing pressed against the thin nylon wall. Every attempt to rationalize the experience was drowned out by the overwhelming scent of pine smoke and copper, seeping into the tent and clinging to his thoughts. Hours passed in a haze of fear, his grip on the sleeping bag tightening with each repetition of the voice. Only when the first pale light of dawn filtered through the fabric did the sounds finally recede, leaving Eric exhausted and forever changed by what he had endured in the darkness. But as he unzipped the tent, the ground outside revealed dozens of boot prints, his own circling the tent in chaotic patterns, offering no explanation, only deeper questions. When dawn broke, Eric unzipped his tent to a chilling sight. Dozens of boot prints encircled his shelter, each one identical to his own. The right print was smeared, dragged through the mud in a way that suggested a limp or something far stranger. It was as if the ground itself had been marked by a presence mimicking his every step, but unable to fully replicate the motion. The pattern was chaotic, overlapping, and impossible to explain away as mere coincidence. In that cold morning light, the evidence was undeniable. Something had been watching, learning, and following, leaving behind a trail that defied rational explanation. Driven by a mounting sense of dread, Eric hurriedly packs his belongings, determined to reach the end of the King's Trail. Yet as he steps onto the path, he finds it blanketed with boot prints identical to his own, stretching ahead, behind, and veering into the forest. Each print bears the same worn tread, the same overpronated mark, blurring the line between what is real and what is imagined. The landscape, once familiar, now feels alien and hostile, as if something unseen is tracking his every move. With every step, Eric wonders if he is truly alone, or if the trail itself has become a labyrinth of his own fears, echoing footsteps that may not belong to him at all. The relentless footsteps shadow Eric, echoing his every movement with uncanny precision. No matter how quickly he walks, or how often he stops, the sound remains constant, never faltering, never falling behind. Each step brings the invisible presence closer, tightening its grip on his nerves and sanity. The forest, once a place of solitude, now feels suffocating, as if something ancient and patient is stalking him. In the cold silence of the north, Eric realized he's no longer alone, and the question lingers: what happens when the footsteps finally catch up? Throughout the day, Eric's sense of reality began to unravel. He saw the figure again and again, always at a distance, standing perfectly still among the birch trees, crouched by a stream, its gaze fixed on him. Each time, it wore his own jacket, carried his backpack, and bore his face. But something was disturbingly off. The eyes were too wide, the mouth too flat, as if the creature was mimicking him without understanding how to be human. Eric pressed on, haunted by the knowledge that whatever followed him was learning, adapting, and growing bolder with every encounter. What would happen if it finally caught up to him? Throughout the final stretch of the King's Trail, Eric became acutely aware of the entity's presence. It never approached directly, instead keeping a steady, unsettling distance, sometimes leading him, sometimes trailing just out of sight. The forest seemed to amplify his anxiety, with his own voice echoing from the trees, warped and hollow, calling his name in a cadence that felt unnatural. Each time Eric glanced up, the figure was there, mirroring his movements, its gaze fixed and unblinking. The relentless repetition of his own voice, combined with the entity's constant proximity, blurred the boundaries between reality and nightmare, leaving Eric to wonder if escape was ever truly possible. As Eric approaches the end of the King's Trail, the air grows thick with the metallic tang of copper, a scent that has haunted him since the first encounter. It is no longer a faint trace but a suffocating presence, signaling the entity's relentless pursuit and its increasing hold over his senses. Each step forward seems to draw the thing closer, its influence manifesting in the landscape and in Eric's own mind. The boundaries between self and shadow blur, leaving Eric uncertain whether he is still alone. In these final moments, the question lingers: what happens when the trail ends, but the presence does not? As Eric finally arrives at the tourist station, the sense of safety he desperately craved proves fleeting. The entity, now closer than ever, stands just meters away, its face contorted in a chilling parody of his own features. The smile it attempts is unnatural, stretched too wide and lacking any warmth, as if it is mimicking human emotion without understanding it. Eric's exhaustion gives way to a deeper dread, realizing that the presence has followed him all the way to the threshold of civilization. Even among the bustle of other hikers, the question lingers: has he truly escaped, or has something learned to follow him beyond the wild? As Eric reached the end of the trail, relief mingled with dread. The entity stood behind him, its face a distorted mirror of his own, eyes too dark, mouth stretched unnaturally. In a voice that mimicked Eric's but fractured and wrong, it declared, "Eric is here. I am Eric." The words echoed through the cold air, unsettling and relentless. Eric forced himself to walk toward the parking lot, refusing to look back, each step measured against the urge to flee. Behind him, the footsteps matched his pace, a chilling reminder that some things in the wilderness refuse to be left behind. The question remains: what followed Eric out of the mountains, and did it ever truly let him go? Eric stepped into the parking lot, surrounded by the familiar sounds of tourists and vehicles, the ordinary world suddenly within reach. Yet, beneath the relief, a cold certainty remained. Whatever had followed him along the King's Trail had not simply vanished. Even as he boarded a taxi to Kiruna, and later a flight to Stockholm, the unsettling presence seemed to shadow his every move, invisible but persistent. For Eric, normalcy felt fragile, as if the boundary between the wilderness and civilization had been irreversibly blurred. The question lingered: had he truly escaped, or was something still watching, waiting, just beyond the edge of the everyday? Eric tried to make sense of what he had witnessed, searching for logical explanations rooted in exhaustion, isolation, or the psychological strain of hiking alone. Yet, none of these theories could account for the uncanny details: the boot prints matching his own, the voice mimicking his thoughts, the persistent presence that seemed to know him intimately. The rational mind falters when confronted with phenomena that defy ordinary understanding. As Eric reflected on his ordeal, the unsettling truth remained. Some experiences on the King's Trail resist explanation, leaving only questions and a lingering sense of dread. What really followed him in those remote northern woods? And why? In the months following his ordeal, Eric abandoned hiking altogether. The memories lingered, vivid and unyielding, replaying each night in the quiet darkness of his apartment. He found himself questioning not just what he saw, but what might exist in the untouched wilderness, entities that defy explanation, watching and learning from the shadows. The King's Trail, once a place of solace, became a landscape of fear and uncertainty. To this day, Eric remains haunted by the possibility that something ancient and unknowable still waits in the empty places, its intentions forever obscured. The King's Trail stands as a testament to nature's grandeur and the mysteries it conceals. Here, the line between legend and lived experience is thin, and the whispers of the Sámi people echo through the silent forests and icy valleys. For those who walk its length, the wilderness offers both awe and unease, hinting at unseen forces that linger just beyond the reach of daylight. In this remote expanse, beauty and darkness coexist, leaving hikers with questions that may never find answers. What truly watches from the shadows, and how much of the old stories are rooted in truth?